Hello, and welcome back to Fractional Futures, the show where we go deep into the marketing challenges SMEs face with a little help from those who've been in the trenches. I'm your host, and today we're picking up where we left off in the last episode, where we explored how a robust SEO strategy can guide smarter marketing decisions on a limited budget. In this episode, we're moving up the chain of command. It's one thing to run SEO experiments, it's another thing entirely to use them to prove value with the C-suite. Marketing leaders today are under increasing pressure to justify long-term investments like SEO in a world that favors short-term performance metrics. So how can marketing leaders connect the dots between organic performance and business outcomes? I'm delighted to be joined once again by Ryan Jones, marketing manager at SEOTesting, a platform built to help marketers run structured SEO experiments and prove performance. Ryan's experience sits right at the intersection of technical SEO, data analysis, and commercial storytelling, which makes him the perfect guest to help us navigate how CMOs can turn SEO into a boardroom conversation. Hi, Ryan. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on again. Excited to chat a bit more.
Good stuff. And I know you've got a special offer for our listeners. Would you like to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we do. So anyone listening to the Fractional Futures podcast can take or make use of an extended trial to SEOTesting. So as standard, we offer everyone 14-day free trial, but this extended trial will give you 45 days to use the platform.
Fantastic. And I have tried it myself and it's very useful. So thanks for that offer, Ryan. It's really appreciated. So shall we dive into the first topic? You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Good stuff. So the first thing I want to look at is kind of the CMO's challenge, SEO versus other channels. SEO could be one of the most cost-effective channels over time, and we explored that in the last episode. But it's often one of the hardest channels to measure, especially compared to something like pay-per-click, where the data is immediate. Ryan, why does SEO often struggle to prove its ROI in a traditional dashboard? And how can marketing leaders get a better alignment of organic efforts with high-level business metrics like revenue, customer acquisition cost, and customer lifetime value?
I think it comes down to, obviously, the difference is in between SEO and PPC, for instance, is obviously you can see the PPC return on investment almost immediately in the dashboard, and that's kind of what it's built for. The difficult thing with SEO is it kind of has an influence across more channels than just search engines. So you might start by creating top of the funnel content for sort of visitors at the informational stage. They'll read a guide, see it's really useful, but they're not quite ready to go to that next stage yet. They're not quite ready to start comparing or purchasing. So they'll often leave, and that's one of the metrics that we can see from that is obviously we can look and say, okay, well, 1,000 people have seen this guide, but we've not seen any conversions from it. And in that sense, you're not seeing any conversions going from guide to conversion. But I think one of the things that we need to track is who goes from guide to then maybe they come back through a remarketing channel on social media and something, and then they buy from that. But it's all about tracking that, almost like that first click attribution, I think is really useful when it comes to SEO. But also realizing that SEO is one of those channels that the attribution is always going to be slightly messy because it's so long compared to other marketing disciplines. So I think that needs to factor into the conversation as well.
And what approaches would you recommend if you're consulting with a client and they're kind of starting from scratch? How do you build that roadmap? How do you map out the attribution? How do you map out the SEO? How do you map out the channels? What is the best approach to consider that?
Yeah, I think the first approach is to start talking to your customers a bit more. So those people that they might contact your business for it might be classed as a lead or a sale straight away. You can have a form in there and just ask where they first heard about you, which is obviously not everyone's going to fill that form in, or not everyone's going to give you the right information, but it does help as a kind of top level metric to see and get an inkling to sort of how many people are actually seeing your site first through Google or Bing or anything like that. But beyond that, having sort of business-friendly dashboards like ChartMogul or a couple of those kind of things are useful for tracking revenue. But I still think one of the best tools around is GA4. the learning curve is quite steep when it comes to GA4, but once you get around that, the use that you can get from it through tracking events rather than cookies and that kind of thing is you can track people for slightly longer. You can see where they came in first and then where they re-entered, and that kind of helps get that attribution across the full stage of the funnel.
And you mentioned cookies there. Obviously, the rules around cookies change quite soon. I think it's this summer, isn't it? So how do you approach that challenge there? If you can't rely on cookies as much going forwards, is it more you have to focus on the J4 events to start tracking attribution and how people are behaving?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a big part of it, obviously. And it won't just be GA4 that comes through. There'll be different analytics tools that filter through that use event-based tracking and that kind of thing. So we might well start to see competitors come out. And if anything, it might make the landscape slightly more competitive with everything being more event-based. But yeah, I think that is something we are going to have to get used to. And we are already starting to see it. We know that more people use browsers in incognito mode. More people are aware of just rejecting cookies just out of habit. So we're already starting to see that analytics is a little bit messy in that kind of area. But yeah, I do think once more platforms, more software changes over to this event-based metric tracking, then I do think it will become slightly easier.
Good stuff. And that's probably a nice segue into the next topic, which is SEO as a performance-driven strategy. So we've nicely set the stage there for why SEO deserves a seat at the performance table. But the next step is execution. So Ryan, there's a couple of things I want to pick your brains on with this. What SEO metrics should marketing leaders or maybe founders or early stage businesses, what metrics should they be monitoring that drive measurable improvement? And how can platforms like SEOTesting, how can they be used as a true performance lever?
Yeah, I still always think it's useful to track the sort of more traditional SEO metrics. So clicks from organic search, impressions, average position, all that kind of thing. I do think that will maybe change in the sort of near future as we start to see a bigger rollout of AI overviews, which we talked about in the previous episode. But at the moment, it is still a really valuable process. It's still something that we do just to keep an eye on is to track those top level SEO metrics, purely because for a lot of businesses, like if we take us as an example, SEO is still the main acquisition channel that we have. And while we're spending time building up social media and other acquisition channels, SEO is still the main one, and we can't forget about that and just move on to the next thing. So I do think it's still important to track those top level metrics. SEO is starting to move into a slightly more sort of multi-channel approach almost as behavior changes and people might start using Google less. So I think it might become part of an SEO's job description to track brand mentions in obviously different kind of things, or brand search volume is always a big one. And then mentions on social media, mentions on different question and answer platforms like Reddit and Quora and that kind of thing. Not necessarily because the work of an SEO is going to have a direct impact on those channels, but purely because search behavior is changing so much. I think that's something that we need to keep an eye on as well.
And for businesses that don't have a mature marketing function, they might not even have a full-time marketer on board. You might have a founder or a co-founder who's kind of tasked with managing the SEO. They might be listening to this thinking, oh my God, this sounds really quite complicated. Does it have to be complicated? What advice would you give to those kind of non-marketers who are tasked with managing a website, trying to do something with SEO? What sorts of things should they be looking at a very bare minimum?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. I think as marketers, we can sometimes get a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of tools that we need to pay for and that kind of thing. But the reality is that free tools will still do almost as good of a job as those paid tools and that kind of thing. So if you've been tasked with looking at these SEO metrics and you might not necessarily have an idea of where to start, my best advice and the best place to start is with just simply Google Search Console and Google Analytics or GA4, just because they're completely free to use. You might get sort of sample data with Google Search Console, but for most businesses, that won't necessarily be an issue. And that'll just be able to give you a top line overview of where your business stands on search. You'll be able to see what keywords are bringing in traffic, where the sort of average position lies, or without having to pay a penny.
Yeah.
And then using those free tools helps you learn a little bit more. So when you start to see the value a little bit more, then that's when the conversation can evolve into, okay, can we use just a tool like SEOTesting, for instance, to make better use of this Search Console data, or do we need to use like an Ahrefs, a SEMrush kind of software and that kind of thing to make better use of clickstream data and all of that? And then and then move into maybe potentially other tools like building your own tools out and that kind of thing. And that tends to happen as the marketing discipline within a business becomes ever more mature.
Some of the clients that I work with, and certainly when I'm speaking to prospects who are talking about their marketing challenges, SEO always comes up. They say, oh, we need to do, we want to rank high. We need to do something with SEO. We've been using an agency. We don't know what the agency is doing. From an organizational point of view, if you're outsourcing the SEO strategy to an agency, and you don't really know what questions to ask them, how can you track the performance of that agency? Because I've seen, there's been one or two scrupulous agencies that I've had to cut off because they were just not doing anything. So how can you kind of police what an agency might be doing if they're tasked with managing your SEO?
Yeah, I think the first thing to start off is kind of having a top level overview of the work that's been done each month, just to keep track. So with some agencies, they might not necessarily work on a monthly reporting basis, and that in most cases that's absolutely fine. But I still think it's useful to get an overview of what work's been done each month. So whether that's a quick call over Zoom or an email that's sent over from the agency to the client and that kind of thing, just explaining the work that's been done. And from then you can go and check yourself as to whether that work has had any kind of impact at all. And this is where testing comes into it as well, because if your agency is doing any form of SEO testing, what they'll be able to do is they'll be able to say, here's the hypotheses that we had, here's the work that we did to test it, and here's the impact that it had over the course of a month. You don't necessarily need any tools for that as well, but you just need an overview of when changes happened on the website, when did traffic increase, decrease, that kind of thing. I do still think it's important to remember that not every SEO test is going to lead to an increase in clicks, and some tests will fail, but it's then important to learn from that and not necessarily repeat the same mistakes. I do think it's important to keep an overview of the work that's gone on each month, what tests have happened, what changes have occurred, where have they outreach to for link acquisition, if that's something that you're doing as well, and just have that top level overview. And from there, you can drill down into the sort of finer details.
Yeah. And when picking an agency, if you're an organization, you don't have a very mature marketing capability and you just want to outsource this because you don't have the time or patience to do these tests yourself. So if you are looking to an agency, is it important to find an agency that are specialists in your sector, your niche? Or is the theory that you can go to any SEO agency and it doesn't matter what sector you're in, they should still do a good job? What are your thoughts around that?
I still think it's important to find a specialist, but I don't think it necessarily has to be a specialist in your niche. I think it has to be a specialist in the type of work that's going to need to move the needle for you. So if you're a smaller sort of SaaS business like SEOTesting, for instance, then it might be content marketing that moves the needle for you more than anything else. And if that's the case, then you're going to want to contact a content marketing specialist agency. Or if you're an e-commerce business, then you might need a SEO agency that's a lot more technical and they've got a lot of technical specialists that can help. Or you might need you might not necessarily need an SEO agency as such, but you might need a digital PR agency to help you build that brand search and get mentioned in press and that kind of thing. So I don't think it necessarily needs to be a specialist in what you do. I think it needs to be a specialist in what you need.
Yeah, that's good advice. And that probably brings us nicely into the final topic, and that's making SEO a boardroom conversation. Now, you might think actually it's quite a tactical thing to take to the boardroom, but especially if you're investing money, outsourcing this, or maybe you're going to make an important hire for having a full-time SEO specialist within the organization. Obviously, that's when the boardroom needs to come in. In terms of translating SEO insights into boardroom language, you've mentioned some sort of language that the boardroom may not understand. The CFO might not understand some of this SEO lingo. So it's really important that marketing leaders or whoever's tasked with managing SEO, they need to show not just activity, but the impact of that activity. So how do we package SEO performance in a way that resonates with the CEO, the CFO, and maybe the investors? And how can those insights inform the broader marketing strategy, including paid channels?
Yeah, I think I just want to touch on that last point that you made as to why SEO needs to be a conversation in the boardroom. And it's because, like we spoke about earlier, it's because it can have an impact across the broader spectrum. Like if you're putting out lots of great informational content, someone might see that, resonate with it a little bit, and then they might pop up. They might see an ad from for that business and then immediately click on that because they resonate. That is an important reason why it does need to be included in boardroom discussions. But in order to make it a more simple process for people to understand and for CFOs and CEO to understand, I think it's important to drill down into, I think, three things. I think we need to know the budget that's gone into what work has been done. I think we need to know exactly what work has been done, and I think we need to know exactly what has happened from that. So it doesn't necessarily need to be, we've spent £10,000 on revamping the entire website, and now we're just waiting to see what happens with that. But it can be sort of like, we've spent £1,000 and we've taken this small section of content on the website, we've revamped all of this content, and then we've republished it. And now we can see that these pieces of content are really starting to grow. We can see that, like, we can say that an SEO test, for instance, it's on average, it's improved these pieces of content by 50%. And then what that allows you to do is go into those boardroom discussions and say, okay, well, if we had this test and this is what happened, if we spend another £5,000, for instance, we can kind of get a good sort of reading for what will happen once this work has been done. And from there, because of the sort of forecasting tools that we can use, we can then translate that into a conversation of, we can spend this money and we can kind of say that this is going to happen. And because we pretty much know that that's going to happen, as long as it's been executed in the same way, we think we're going to see these revenue gains, these SEO gains. But I do think it's important to start with that top level metric of revenue, and that always needs to be included in the discussion.
I guess some of the listeners listening to this episode, they might say, look, we're happy to invest £10,000 for argument's sake on optimizing stuff, whatever that may be. Some CEOs, some CFOs might say, actually, we'll just blow all that 10K on pay-per-click because it's instant and that's fine. Others might say, well, actually, let's just invest that on revamping the website, republishing content, see what happens. Some might say, well, we'll spend half on paid, half on SEO, see what happens. What's your advice? How would you approach this? Do you put all your eggs in one basket?
I have two different answers for this. If you are a sort of early stage business that you've got a budget and you need to grow quickly, if that's the case, then you need to find what's working for your business and double down on that. And so in the sense that if it's SEO that's really moving the needle for you, then you should double down on that. If it's paid at the minute that's really moving the needle, then you should double down on that and put not necessarily every single penny of it, but put most of that into what's really moving the needle for you. But if you're a more established business with multiple acquisition channels, then I am a big fan of distributing that across different platforms. So it won't just be a case of putting this £10,000 into paid, because, I mean, we know what we can get from paid advertising if we put £10,000 in. But we can sort of say, if we're a more established business, we can say, okay, let's put £5,000 into paid because we know what's going to come from it. We know we'll see positive ROI. And then let's also put £5,000 into SEO activities. Doesn't necessarily need to be a website revamp, or it could be link building activities and that kind of thing. But we can use that budget, run smaller scale tests. We can then understand what work moves the needle the most, and then we can use the rest of the budget to just plow on forward that way.
So basically, with SEO, it's just a continual experiment, isn't it? You just have to keep iterating, testing, waiting to see the results. And in terms of that, what kind of timeline could anyone expect to run these experiments? So if you've got a website, you say, right, we're going to invest some time in revamping this section. How long does it take for those results to come through? Because not only do you have to recraft the content, you've got to tell Google that the page has been updated. You have to wait for it to be indexed. You have to give it a bit of time. What's the typical timeline to start seeing results? Is it a few days? Is it a few weeks? Is it a month or two?
Yeah, I think the kind of standard advice that we give out to our testing customers is we generally say 6 to 8 weeks to run a test. So that would be obviously doing the work, making the changes on the website, asking Google to recrawl those pages, and then running the test for 6 to 8 weeks as a kind of benchmark. But there are caveats as to that, as to if your website is getting more traffic. So you might be a large e-commerce site, for instance, then you'll reach statistical significance a lot quicker. And the likelihood is that you might only need to run that test for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But if you're on the smaller end, then you might need to run it for longer. It is just about waiting to get enough clicks to reach that statistically significant result. And then you can really say, okay, well, we can be a lot more confident that this is a causal change and it's not anything that's correlational. So it comes down to waiting just enough to get statistical significance.
You mentioned there that these experiments could take 6 to 8 weeks. So now you can guarantee you'll start one of these experiments, then midway through, Google will release a new core update or algorithm change. How do those changes impact that experiment? Because you're kind of comparing apples with oranges, aren't you? What happens? Is it you just have to suck it up, or do you have to maybe rerun the test again once the core update's embedded down?
Yeah, that's something that we've seen ourselves. We've been running lots of tests, and then we've had Google release core updates. So it is a problem for sure. But I think what needs to happen in that sense is wait for the core update to reach its conclusion, and then rerun the test. But obviously, if you've already done the work and you're just in that results gathering stage, then I don't think there's much use in reverting that change during a core update only to then do the same change again. So if that kind of stuff has happened, then it is okay to leave it, but you might just need to disregard those few URLs and retest again. But don't let work go down the drain just because a core update has happened. But yeah, if you're in the process of planning work and a core update happens, it is always a good idea just to pause that and just wait for Google to settle down again, and then run the test when we can be more assured that it's causal change and not correlational because of this core update.
And let's say you do one of these experiments, it's not impacted by a core update or anything like that, and the result of that experiment pushes you backwards from your original starting point. Does that constant chopping and changing, does that impact your authority on Google at all? Or does Google say, actually, we can see this company, they're testing the website, they're making iterative changes, yes, it's going up, sometimes it's going down. Does that impact your overall Google performance? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm not necessarily 100% sure on it, and I don't think anyone can be 100% sure on it unless they work for Google or have some sort of inside track. But I think from my perspective, Google's smart enough to know now that they can see the changes that happen on a website. They know that it's you improving content or building some internal links out to different site sections and things like that. And I think they're smart enough to understand that you are trying to improve the website. Obviously, not everything will improve the website, and some changes will have the opposite effect in a sense, and you might lose a little bit of traffic. But from Google's standpoint, I don't think that will impact your authority or anything at all, because I think they'll be aware that you are making changes to try and benefit the user, and as long as you're not doing anything black hat and that kind of thing, then you'll still be in good standing with Google. I do think Google encourages making things more helpful for the user. So as long as you're testing with that goal in mind, then I don't think you can go wrong.
Yeah, that's reassuring to know. So, right, that's probably a good place to wrap up this episode. So, thank you for once again guiding us through how marketing leaders can leverage platforms like SEOTesting and others not just to optimize performance, but clearly demonstrate the return on investment and have those important boardroom conversations. As we've heard today, SEO doesn't have to be a black box. With the right testing mindset and focus on measurable outcomes, marketing leaders or even those charged with managing the website can make a compelling case for long-term investment, even if you're in an environment where a short-term result often dominates. In the next episode, we're switching gears and looking forward, and we'll be asking, where is SEO heading in 2025 and beyond? From AI-driven search to changes in user behavior and evolving Google algorithms, we'll be exploring what happens in the next phase of SEO, how that looks, and how businesses can prepare now to stay ahead. So look forward to that one. So until then, thanks for tuning in, and Ron and I will see you in the next episode.